From street fights gone wrong to shocking acts of cruelty, the tragic deaths of these actors prove one terrifying truth, that Hollywood can be as dangerous as it is glamorous. The story of Dr. Hang S. Noor is one of the most inspiring and tragic in Hollywood history. Born in Cambodia in 1940, Noor was a trained doctor who was unfortunate enough to live through the horrific reign of Pol Pot. One of the worst despots of the 20th century, Pol Pot was the leader of Cambodia's Khmer Rouge government in the late 1970s. He was largely responsible for the Cambodian genocide, which killed as many as 2 million people. During the genocide, Noor lived in a forced labor camp where he was tortured and lost both his wife and unborn child. Noor eventually escaped Cambodia and made his way to the United States, but the experiences traumatized him. Once in the US, Noor was cast in the movie The Killing Fields, which takes place amidst the Cambodian genocide he had endured in real life. He was cast as a Cambodian-American reporter Dith Pran and won an Oscar for his outstanding performance.
I know his heart. I love him like my brother. And I do anything for him. Anything.
Sadly, Noor was killed on February 25, 1996, while he was parked in his car outside of his home. Authorities found him shot to death by 3 members of the Oriental Lazy Boy street gang, who were all later given life sentences in prison. The killers were all in their early 20s and also from Cambodia. Little Rascals icon Carl Switzer was tragically gunned down on January 21, 1959, by a friend named Moses Bud Stilts. Switzer and Stilts were partners who owned a bear hunting guide business together, but had fallen out over financial issues. Switzer thought that Stilts owed him money and confronted him at a California home, and the two ended up fighting over a pistol, which went off and killed Switzer. Switzer reportedly thought that Stilts owed him $50, though it seems that Stilts may not have agreed and refused to pay the money. The two were both under the influence of alcohol at the time of the shooting. Though Stilts was arrested by police and charged with Switzer's death, he was acquitted of self-defense as it was ruled a justifiable homicide under California law by a jury. Switzer had come to prominence in Hollywood as a child actor, appearing as a beloved character Alfalfa in the comedy short series Our Gang from the 1930s and 40s. Switzer continued his career in Hollywood, racking up well over 100 credits by the time of his death. When Bertrand Cantat released his new album in the fall of 2013, there was some pretty understandable outrage, but it had absolutely nothing to do with Cantat's musical abilities. 10 years prior, on August 1, 2003, Cantat had attacked his former mistress, French actor Marie Trintignant, and beaten her to death in a fit of rage. The two were staying in Lithuania, and authorities detained Cantat after Trintignant was found severely injured. At the time, Cantat was the lead singer for the French band Noir Désir. He initially denied doing anything wrong. The couple had gotten into a fight on July 27, and Trintignant was in a coma for nearly a week before she passed away on August 1st. A year later, Cantat was convicted of killing Trintignant and sentenced to 8 years in prison. However, Cantat was released from prison on parole in October 2007 after serving less than half of his sentence. Marie was 41 years old at the time of her death. She had been very popular as an actor, having won multiple awards for her performances. When Dorothy Stratton was murdered on August 14, 1980, her career in Hollywood had just started to get underway. Born in 1960, Stratton was killed by her estranged husband, Paul Snider, who had been the one initially responsible for Stratton's success by getting her signed by Playboy when she was just 18. Originally from Canada, the couple moved to Los Angeles to pursue her modeling career. By all accounts, Stratton was an incredibly charming young woman, but the same could not be said about Snider, who often rubbed others the wrong way.
He was not on the up and up. You know, if you shake hands, you count your fingers after you do it.
The two got married in June 1979, just before she hit her big break, but there was already trouble in the relationship. Stratton felt dependent on Snider, but he displayed misogynistic tendencies and appeared to be unfaithful to her. Eventually, the two started to move apart as Stratton began to excel in her career, which upset Snider greatly. Soon, Stratton was living with filmmaker Peter Bogdanovich, who had written her into a movie he was making called They All Laughed, which would be released after her death. While they were separated, Stratton agreed to meet with Snider at his house to work out a divorce agreement. Snider subsequently murdered Stratton before dying by suicide himself. Stratton was only 20 years old at the time of her death. While Stephanie Mosley might not have been the biggest star, she was still fairly well known in Hollywood when she was murdered on December 8, 2014. Mosley was killed by her husband, rapper Earl Hayes. Police came over to investigate a shooting after receiving a call from a neighbor who said he'd heard around a dozen shots fired early in the morning in their apartment. Both were reportedly dead by the time the SWAT team showed up. Hayes appeared to have killed Mosley before dying by suicide himself. While it wasn't entirely clear what Hayes' motive was for killing Mosley, the couple had recently been separated, potentially over infidelity, though they were reportedly trying to work things out and get back together. Mosley was appearing on the show Hit the Floor on VH1 when she died. Mosley's credits mainly included doing dance and choreography work for singers such as Beyoncé and Britney Spears, but she also had more than a dozen acting credits, including a role as a cheerleader on Ashley Tisdale's show Hellcats. Acting since 2003, Mosley was 30 years old when she died. Lana Clarkson was a 40-year-old actor who was murdered by the once famous record producer Phil Spector in 2003. While she was not a huge draw during her career, she still had notable roles in a few films. Her last credit was in 2001, a few years before her death. Clarkson and Spector had met on the night of February 2, 2003. She voluntarily accompanied him to his house in California. According to prosecutors in Spector's murder trial, Clarkson spurned Spector's advances early the next morning on February 3rd, which upset Spector so much that he shot her to death. Spector claimed that she had died by suicide and denied shooting her. However, immediately after killing Clarkson, Spector reportedly left the house and confessed the murder to his driver, who would later relay his words to the police.
As soon as he opened the door, I jumped, went to the back door, and he was standing in the door with the gun in the hand.
Police arrested Spector the night after the murder, but he was able to get out on $1 million bail while he was awaiting trial. 20 months later, prosecutors charged Spector with murder, but the first trial ended in hung jury when they could not get a conviction. Upon retrial, the 69-year-old Spector was convicted of murder and given a sentence of 19 years to life in prison. In 2021, Spector died at age 81 while still incarcerated in a California state prison. Judith Barcy was a child actor who, by the time of her death at age 10, already had an impressive 25 acting credits to her name. This included her role as Thea in Jaws 4: Revenge. She also starred in 72 commercials, helping her to bring in a six-figure salary at her young age. Beneath the success, however, Judith was suffering an abusive relationship at the hands of her father. For years leading up to Judith's death, Joseph Barcy had threatened to kill her and her mother, by one friend's count saying so at least 500 times. Joseph was also physically abusive to Judith. Joseph and Maria had fled the Soviet Union in the 1950s to settle in Los Angeles, but the couple's relationship quickly began to sour, partly over Joseph's drinking. They separated after she filed a police report in 1986 alleging abuse and verbal threats, though no legal action was taken against him. According to police, Joseph shot both Judith and Maria before burning their bodies and dying by suicide at their home in San Fernando, California. Though he got a late start to his acting career, Thomas Jefferson Byrd was a widely respected and admired actor when he was shot to death at age 70 on October 3, 2020. Born in 1950, Byrd did not get his start in the acting industry until he was already in his early 40s, but he finished his career with more than 30 credits. This included a number of Spike Lee movies, most recently the director's TV series She's Gotta Have It. He was also a Tony Award nominee in 2003. Witnesses suggested that the shooting may have taken place over an argument that Byrd allegedly got into at a local store, but police could not confirm this. A break in the case came a few weeks later on October 16th when 30-year-old Antonio Rines was arrested in connection with Byrd's death. He was charged with felony murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison. On June 10, 2016, the world was shocked by the news of the murder of singer and actor Christina Grimmie. Grimmie had shot to fame by singing on her popular YouTube channel and appearing on the reality TV competition show The Voice. She had also just acted in her first feature film, The Matchbreaker, which was released just a few months after her death. Grimmie was in the middle of an autograph signing when she was murdered by 27-year-old Kevin James Loibl. She had just performed a set of music immediately prior to the autograph session at a venue called the Plaza Live in Orlando. Loibl died by suicide after he was tackled by Grimmie's brother following the shooting, and police found more weapons and ammunition on him afterward.
Just don't understand why he would do this to her.
Grimmie was only 22 years old when she was murdered and had her entire career ahead of her. After her death, her brother Marcus Grimmie began the Christina Grimmie Foundation in her honor, which helps victims of gun violence. On February 27, 1985, prominent TV actor David Huffman was stabbed to death by a 16-year-old after attempting to stop a car burglary. Huffman had begun his acting career back in 1973. He mainly worked on TV, though he was also in a few movies. The teenager, Gerano Samano Villanueva, was breaking into vans near where Huffman had been parked. After hearing a commotion, Huffman was told that Villanueva had broken into a motorhome, and he drove after Villanueva, trying to stop and detain him. Once Huffman reached the young teen, he and Villanueva got into a struggle. It ended with Villanueva fatally stabbing Huffman twice. Despite their difference in age, the 39-year-old Huffman was only a little bigger than the 16-year-old Villanueva, and it was not Villanueva's first run-in with the law. Villanueva was given a 26-year to life sentence for Huffman's murder. In 2011, the San Diego District Attorney reported that Villanueva had been denied parole and would not be eligible again until 2026. Merlin Santana was tragically murdered in South Central Los Angeles just as he was primed for his breakout. Born in 1976, Santana was most widely known for his starring role on The Steve Harvey Show, where he played Romeo Santana for 122 episodes from 1996 to 2002. He had also obtained roles on a number of other major shows, and he had recently started making the jump from TV to movies. Sadly, that was all cut short on November 9, 2002, when Santana was shot to death while sitting in a car with his friend. The circumstances surrounding his death appear to revolve around a 15-year-old runaway named Monique King. Apparently, Santana and King were at a house that night when King falsely claimed that Santana and one of his friends had made unwanted sexual advances on her. She left the house and got two of her older friends, who then came back and shot Santana while he was in the car. The killer, Damian Andre Gates, was sentenced to 70 years to life in prison. King was remanded into custody for 8 years, and the other accomplice received a 23-year sentence. Santana was only 26 years old at the time of the shooting.
O.J. Simpson's murder trial dominated headlines for months. But who was Nicole Brown Simpson, the woman O.J. was accused of killing? There's nothing quite like the love of a dog, and on that June night in 1994, it was the melancholy howling of Nicole Brown Simpson's dog that first alerted neighbors to the fact that something terribly wrong had happened. Neighbors all heard the dog, reported the Associated Press. Stephen Schwab took a break to walk his own dog when he came across the white Akita and saw that the dog was splattered with blood. Schwab's neighbor, also summoned by the dog's wails, decided to take the dog and walk it back in the direction it had come from. The dog ran up the path to a condo where the bloodied body of Nicole Brown Simpson lay. Later, the Los Angeles Times reported that the dog's actions allowed authorities to pinpoint the time of the murders. The Washington Post reported that the courtroom was uncomfortable on the day that they were shown photos of the crime scene and read descriptions from the coroner's findings. Highlighting the brutality of the killings was necessary to establish the idea that the murders had been committed in a fit of jealous rage. Los Angeles County Coroner Lakshman Satyavagiswaran testified that Nicole Brown Simpson had been lying on the ground, unable to fight back against an attacker that stood over her, as her throat was cut with such force that the knife sliced into her spine. The New York Times reported that prosecutors were also able to make strong cases for a few other things based on the state of the bodies. Although Nicole was covered in blood, her feet were clean, which led police to conclude that she had been killed first and that she had been restrained as it happened. Law enforcement testified that Ron Goldman, on the other hand, fought back. Marks in the dirt around his body and the fact that his shirt was pulled up seemed to indicate that a struggle took place immediately after Nicole was killed. Nicole was stabbed a total of 12 times, while Goldman was stabbed 25 times.
Mr. Simpson is a fugitive of justice right now.
According to the Associated Press's timeline of Nicole Brown Simpson's murder and the following court case, the night started with her daughter's dance recital. Her children, Sydney and Justin, were just 8 and 5 years old when she was killed at their home. Had their dog not alerted neighbors and dragged them to the crime scene, it's entirely possible they would have discovered the bodies of their mother and Goldman. Penn Live says that when law enforcement first responded to the call from neighbors, they found a tranquil scene inside the home. She had drawn a bath and made a bowl of ice cream, and the television was on. Her children were sound asleep in their respective bedrooms, unaware of what had happened just outside their doorstep. Nicole's family has spoken about the struggle to protect the children from the media circus that followed, and their attempts at helping them live as normal a life as possible. Regardless of whether one thinks O.J. Simpson was guilty or innocent, there's no denying that Nicole Brown Simpson's murder brought a chilling history to light. During O.J.'s trial, prosecutors pointed to an incident that happened on January 1st, 1989. When police arrived at the Simpson home, Nicole had injuries so extensive that she was taken to the hospital for treatment. The official police report quoted her as saying, "He's going to kill me. He's going to kill me." According to the New York Times, it was the 9th time officers had responded to domestic violence-related calls at the home. 4 months after the call, O.J. was sentenced to 2 years probation, 120 hours of community service, a $200 fine, and a court-ordered $500 donation to a women's shelter. Officers recounted Nicole as saying, "You never do anything about him. You talk to him and then you leave. I want him arrested. I want him out so I can get my kids." When questions were raised about whether or not O.J. had gotten preferential treatment because of his fame, Lucy Friedman of New York City's Victim Services said that jail sentences for domestic battery were rare, saying, "It's still not considered as serious a crime as battering on the street."
Finally, in 1992, Nicole woke up to the reality of her situation.
Nicole Brown Simpson's death came about 2 years after she left and divorced O.J. Simpson. They had been married for about 7 years, and in the middle of their time together, O.J. had been charged with spousal battery. According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, their relationship had started with often overlooked warning signs. That, they say, included a courtship that progressed very, very quickly, in which Nicole was showered with gifts that O.J. often talked about. The hotline says that a new partner might be more willing to accept or overlook hints of abusive behavior if they're also being treated as if they are being put on a pedestal. There were also reports of intimidation, and the hotline cites one incident where police were called after O.J. smashed her car's windshield with a baseball bat. In the Fox television special, O.J. Simpson, The Lost Confession, domestic violence commentator Rita Smith points out, subtle and not-so-subtle forms of violence are used to continue to keep control over their victim. So him just bouncing the bat off the tire initially was a subtle message.
I am in charge. I will determine the framework for this relationship.
O.J. recalled the incident and indicated that there was nothing wrong with what happened, saying, "I mean, it's my car. I paid for it," I said. "I pay for everything around here." During O.J. Simpson's trial for Simpson's murder, prosecutors decided that they needed to establish a motive. When they started interviewing those who knew Nicole, they uncovered what they presented as a pattern of stalking and harassment in the months and years leading up to her death. One of the most intriguing testimonies came from Keith Zlomzowicz, a name that might not be instantly recognizable, but that is forever tied to the tragic events of that 1994 night. Zlomzowicz was, in addition to having dated Nicole, the owner of the restaurant that Nicole had eaten dinner at on the night of her death, and the employer of Ron Goldman. Zlomzowicz testified to a series of incidents where he said O.J. had spied on them, kicked the door of her house in, and issued some pretty serious threats. It was also Zlomzowicz who asked Goldman to drop off a pair of sunglasses that Nicole had left behind. Los Angeles police officer Ron Shipp was in a bit of a unique position. Not only was he a friend of the Simpsons, but he was also one of the responding officers to her phone calls to the police. He told Vanity Fair she had told him she was being stalked, and recalled, "The Jew speaking through a window? Come on, I didn't see that happening. I gave this guy so much leeway." Faye Resnick was most recently featured on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, but in the early 1990s, she was a friend of both Nicole Brown Simpson and O.J. Simpson. Just a few months after Nicole's murder, the release of her book, Nicole Brown Simpson, The Private Diary of a Life Interrupted, brought the trial to a halt as it was debated whether or not the contents would have an influence. Still, Vulture says that the book, described as tawdry and tragic, reads in part as troublingly honest. That's particularly evident in places where Resnick not only accuses O.J. of some manipulative behavior, but seems to reveal some of her own, including an incident where she asks Nicole not to leave O.J. until after a party she was planning.
He's just saying anything he can without proof, without evidence.
According to the Associated Press, Resnick said that she had called Nicole just a few hours before her death. She also said that a few days prior, she had told Nicole that she was afraid that she was going to die. She recalled telling her, "Please, let's just get out of here. Let's go to Europe." Nicole told her in response that the drugs she was taking were making her paranoid. Needless to say, Nicole didn't go to Europe, and on the night she was murdered, Resnick was in an addiction treatment facility. The year 2020 was the 25th anniversary of the verdict in O.J. Simpson's criminal trial. On that occasion, Investigation Discovery aired O.J. and Nicole, An American Tragedy, with one of the major reveals of the show being Nicole's diaries. Her sister, Tanya Brown, was quoted as saying, "Maybe she knew this was her destiny, and maybe subconsciously she knew something was going to happen. Maybe that's why she kept real detailed diary entries." The diaries, it was revealed, were discovered in a safe deposit box along with photos of her injuries. The first entry went all the way back to 1978, and she wrote, "First time he beat me up, threw me on the floor, hit me, kicked me. We went to the hotel where he continued to beat me for hours and I continued crawling for the door." She also wrote about other incidents that sent her to the hospital, and she detailed pretending that she was in an accident of one sort or another. In another entry, she wrote that he had pulled a gun on her and demanded she have an abortion. The diaries weren't allowed to be entered as evidence during the murder trial, as it was ruled they were hearsay and not admissible.
Subconsciously, she knew something was going to happen.
It's no secret that in many cases, The names of the victims get overlooked and buried behind the names of accused killers. And that, say some of Nicole Brown Simpson's closest friends and family, is the second part of the tragedy. As a friend told the Los Angeles Times, "I feel that Nicole has gotten lost in all this." Even as the criminal court case of O.J. Simpson dragged on, she was portrayed as a victim of domestic abuse and ultimately of murder. But those who knew her best argued that so much more was lost in the courtroom. They knew a Nicole who had spent all of her adult life in a celebrity relationship. The couple met when she was 18 years old. And they also knew that she had been determined to break away from that and forge her own path. They knew a Nicole who was, quote, bubbly, always happy and smiling, according to her former teacher, Bill Prestridge. They described a girl who was ready to get out of high school, who wanted to do big things, and for a time, all appearances seemed to be one of a happy and loving relationship. However, one friend was quoted as saying, "The truth is, no one really knew her during her marriage. She was never free to be herself or to have friends." While no killer ever served jail time for the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, something else did happen. It put domestic violence on the nation's radar as an issue that wasn't just something that lurked behind closed doors anymore. The statistics from a 2018 Violence Policy Center report were pretty staggering. It's estimated that 1 in 4 women will be victims of domestic violence. The numbers were just as shocking for men, with 1 in 9 also being victims. Nicole Brown Simpson's death, and ultimately her letters, diaries, and photographs, opened up a conversation about domestic violence. In some cases, it was in the context of Nicole's death that people heard the term domestic violence for the first time. That's true for Katie Ray Jones, who went on to become the CEO of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. On the heels of the trial came the Violence Against Women Act, and Ray Jones described the case as, quote, exposure into this world of abuse, specifically physical abuse and emotional abuse, and that controlling behavior that we all started hearing about as the trial unfolded. If you or someone you know is dealing with domestic abuse, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. You can also find more information, resources, and support at their website.
In 1993, just after Michael Jordan had won his 3rd straight NBA title, his father, James Jordan, was found murdered. This is the tragic story of James Jordan's senseless death. James Raymond Jordan Sr. was born on July 31, 1936 in Wallace, North Carolina. He met his wife, Dolores Peoples, at a basketball game in 1954. When the two met, they fell head over heels in love. Ray, as Dolores referred to him, said he planned to marry her one day, and despite the objections of her father, the two began to date. After graduating, James entered the U.S. Air Force and was sent to San Antonio, while Dolores went to trade school in Alabama. But the pair missed each other too much to be separated. 2 years after meeting, they were married. James transferred to Virginia, and Dolores left school and moved in with her parents-in-law. Over the next few years, the pair would have 3 children as James left the Air Force to work at a local textile mill in North Carolina. Dreaming of a better life, the family moved to New York, where James attended trade school under the GI Bill and learned how to work with hydraulic equipment. During this time, Michael was born, the 4th of James and Dolores' 5 children. Soon, the family resettled in Wilmington, North Carolina. While Michael Jordan was only one of 5 children in the family, he and James Sr. were joined at the hip throughout his childhood, with Michael mirroring his father in everyday life. Michael's famous trademark of sticking his tongue out on the basketball court came from his father, who would do the same action when concentrating intensely on a project. Surprisingly, when it comes to athletics, James didn't start his son on the hardwood, but rather on the baseball diamond, introducing him to the sport when he was 6 years old. Though Michael, of course, went on to become a basketball phenom, James still harbored a desire for his son to play baseball. Don't take this to suggest that James didn't appreciate his son's basketball skills. On the contrary, he was a close-knit member of Michael's basketball entourage and became a common face on TV as he watched his son light up the court. In a 1991 sideline interview, James spoke about being Michael's #1 fan.
I always thought Michael would play baseball. Of course, he had that year that he grew so much, and it's just been a joy watching him develop into the player that the world can see today.
Michael Jordan said that after the 1993 season, when he had just won his 3rd straight NBA title with the Chicago Bulls, his father suggested he leave basketball behind and try his hand at professional baseball. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to anyone, James would not live to see his son play another game in any sport. For Michael and James Jordan, the month of June 1993 was a time of celebration. Michael had just gotten his 3rd straight NBA title, the first three-peat in the sport's history since the Boston Celtics won 8 straight titles from 1959 to 66. During this time, like throughout his career, James Sr. was standing right by his son's side, regarded as not just a father to Michael, but a close friend. Author Sam Smith said of the father-son pair, "I have no doubt he was closer to James than anyone else in his life." 1 month after the Chicago Bulls defeated the Phoenix Suns in the NBA Finals, James set off in a red Lexus SC400, gifted to him by his son, to attend a friend's funeral in Wilmington, North Carolina. The plan was for James to attend the funeral in Wilmington, drive to Charlotte, and then hop on a plane to Chicago. The funeral was the last time James was seen alive. On July 23, 1993, about a week before his 57th birthday, James Jordan was sleeping in his car on the side of the road in Lumberton, North Carolina. He had grown tired during his drive to Charlotte and had decided to park his car at the intersection of US 74 and Interstate 95 to rest. His sports car attracted the attention of 2 local men, Daniel Green and Larry Demery, who decided to take the car and all its contents in an armed robbery. During the robbery, one of the 2 men fired a single fatal gunshot into James's chest. Afterward, authorities said the 2 rummaged through the car for any valuables, finding among other objects 2 championship rings that Michael had given to his father. The 2 had discovered they'd killed the father of the most popular athlete in the world, and there was no going back. The men took the car and dumped James Jordan's body in a swamp in South Carolina. Despite James's absence causing serious concern, the Jordan family took 3 weeks to report his disappearance. The family had been contacting people privately, hoping that they had seen him, but nobody had. 18 days after his murder, James's vehicle was found in Fayetteville, North Carolina, but James himself was not. The body of James Jordan Sr. was not discovered until August 3rd, 11 days after his murder, when a local fisherman came across the remains in Nicole, South Carolina, more than 40 miles from where he had been killed. Exposure to the elements had left the body unrecognizable, and James was cremated as a John Doe. It was only through dental records that officials were able to identify the body. 3 weeks after his disappearance, the Jordan family had finally learned the truth. Now they and the rest of the nation were left to wonder who did it and why. Larry Demery and Daniel Green were lifelong friends in Lumberton, North Carolina, whose lives took a sinister turn. As former Robeson County District Attorney Johnson Britt detailed to the Chicago Tribune in 2018, "I was dealing with 2 kids who were on a crime spree, and that culminated with the death of Mr. Jordan, and each crime they committed together became increasingly more violent. That violence culminated in the fatal robbery of James Jordan. Before dumping the car they stole, the 2 young men made 3 dozen phone calls with James's car phone over a 4-day period. It was these calls that would be their undoing, with police using the call records to track them down." The trial of Larry Demery and Daniel Green played out in the national spotlight. The evidence against them was strong. Both had made phone calls from James's stolen Lexus, and Green had also made home videos rapping while wearing James's stolen jewelry. Given all the evidence against them in this crime, as well as for multiple other armed robberies, Larry Demery agreed to plead guilty and testify against Green at the trial. According to his testimony, Demery said the 2 had planned to simply rob unsuspecting tourists at a nearby Quality Inn when they spotted Jordan's Lexus. Demery claims that Green desired the car and their plan was to tie up the owner by the side of the road. However, when James awoke, he claimed Green shot him without hesitation. Green and his lawyers disputed Demery's story and his credibility, but it didn't end up mattering. Both Green and Demery were convicted of first-degree murder and given life sentences, each maintaining that the other was the triggerman. James Jordan Sr. stayed close to his son from childhood to NBA stardom. In 1991, after Jordan won his first NBA title, James could be seen consoling an emotional Michael as he cried holding the Larry O'Brien trophy. 2 years and 2 more titles later, after the death of his father, Michael decided enough was enough. On October 6, 1993, Jordan announced his retirement from the NBA at the age of 30, telling the press that he had lost his passion for the sport.
When I lose the sense of motivation and the sense of to prove something as a basketball player, it's time for me to move away from the game of basketball.
One of the first questions asked, of course, was how much his father's murder had to do with his decision. Journalist and author Bob Greene, who wrote 2 biographies about Jordan, thinks his father's death was critical in prompting the change in careers.
Michael Jordan would have never tried to play baseball had his father not been murdered.
Despite his son reaching the top of the basketball world early in his NBA career, making the All-Star game in his rookie season and setting records by just his second, James still challenged Michael to pick baseball back up.
His father even recommended to him after we won the first championship that he go play baseball at that time.
Shortly after his NBA retirement, to everyone's surprise, Michael would sign with the Birmingham Barons, the minor league affiliate of the Chicago White Sox. In his 1 season with the Barons, Jordan drew a lot of attention, but wasn't very experienced on the field. Every mistake he made attracted attention. He was criticized and accused of being delusional.
Calls it his dream that he wants to be a Major League Baseball player. I call it a delusion.
Despite the onslaught of negative press attention, he did show improvement throughout the season. But then the 1994 players' strike happened, shutting down baseball for 232 days. Not wanting to cross the picket line, Jordan retired from baseball. But as the world would soon find out, he was far from retired from sports.
So if I desire to come back and play again, maybe that's what I want to do. Maybe that's the challenge that I may need someday down the road.
At his press conference announcing his retirement, Jordan said, "The most positive thing I can take from my father not being here with me today is that he saw my last basketball game, and that means a lot." But ultimately, Jordan would honor his father not by staying away from basketball, but returning. A year and a half after his initial retirement, Michael returned to the NBA. After falling to the Orlando Magic in the 1995 playoffs, Jordan and the Bulls would complete their second three-peat of the decade, winning 3 straight titles between 1996 and 1998. In true Hollywood fashion, the team clinched their 4th title of the decade on Father's Day. The moment overwhelmed Jordan, who was left sobbing in the Chicago locker room.
I can't even put it in words. On Father's Day, what it means to me. I know he's watching.
Both Larry Demery and Daniel Green were convicted of the murder of James Jordan Sr. Demery's guilty plea and testimony allowed him to be the first of the two to have a chance of parole. In August 2013, 2 decades after the murder, Demery had his first shot at parole. He was denied then and again in 2016. In his 3rd attempt, Demery was granted parole and is set to be released on August 6, 2023. As for Daniel Green, he has maintained that while he robbed and hid Jordan's body, he was not the murderer. Green attempted to get a new trial, but was rejected by an appeals court in 2019. Now 43, he remains in Lumberton Correctional Institution. In an interview on the Oprah Winfrey Show 3 months after the murder, Jordan said that he neither wanted to meet his father's killers nor ask them why they did it, because any reason they could give him would still be totally meaningless.
It's better that I don't know.
Dimebag Darrell is known primarily for 2 things: his iconic metal band Pantera and his horrific premature death. Born in Texas in 1966 as Darrell Lance Abbott, the future guitar legend had music in his blood. His father, Jerry Abbott, was a country music producer and songwriter. Darrell began playing guitar when he was a teenager, and by 1981, he and his brother Vinnie Paul had created Pantera. They would eventually add bassist Rex Brown and singer Phil Anselmo to the mix. The band released a few albums in the 80s, but they didn't reach the mainstream until their breakout album, Cowboys from Hell, in 1990. They gained hordes of fans, thanks to their aggressive sound and powerful lyrics.
They talk about, being strong and inner strength, and to me, that's what real heavy metal should be about.
Cowboys from Hell made Pantera a household name, and their subsequent albums, Vulgar Display of Power and Far Beyond Driven, were released with much success. By 2003, however, Pantera had split due to a conflict between the brothers and Anselmo. According to Paul, Anselmo hadn't been showing the brothers the respect that they felt they deserved. As a result, Darrell and Paul quickly started a new band, Damage Plan. Damage Plan was a passion project for both Darrell and Paul. Though their new band was nowhere near as successful as Pantera, they were glad to be out of the negative atmosphere they were formerly in with Anselmo. In February 2004, Damage Plan released their debut album, Newfound Power, and decided to hit the road. Loudwire writes that Damage Plan was 2 shows away from their tour's end when the unthinkable happened. On December 8th, the band was playing at the El Rosa Villa Club in Columbus, Ohio. That's when Nathan Gale, a former Marine, charged through the stage while Damage Plan was playing. Gale shot Darrell in the back of the head multiple times with a 9mm Beretta handgun, killing him instantly. According to Rolling Stone, Gale proceeded to shoot and kill 3 others: a fan, Nathan Bray, the band's head of security, Jeff Mayhem Thompson, and a roadie, Aaron A. Hulk. Billboard reports that Bray climbed on stage to give Darrell CPR before attempting to aid Thompson, who had been shot twice. He was then killed after being shot in the chest. Hulk was also a former Marine and is believed to have been shot when he attempted to stop Gale. Minutes later, an officer arrived at the scene and shot 25-year-old Gale dead. According to Loudwire, the last 2 words Darrell said to his brother were Van Halen. Paul stated that this was their code word that they told each other at each show as a reminder to have a good time. Though the true reason for Gale's deadly rampage is unknown, one thing is clear. he was obsessed with both heavy metal and Pantera. According to another Loudwire article, it was initially thought that he blamed Darrell for the band's demise. Some now believe Gale's severe mental illness was to blame, as it was reported that he believed Pantera was stealing his thoughts. Gale's mother, Mary Clark, told NBC News that her son was convinced that the band had stolen lyrics he had written. One of Gale's friends said that he thought the band was stealing his identity. Clark went on to explain that Gale suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, a condition that resulted in his discharge from the military. Moreover, Clark admitted that she had bought the 9mm gun used in the shooting as a gift prior to Gale's diagnosis, and said that she understood why the officer who killed him did what he did. She told a local news station, "You'll never know how many lives he saved." According to ABC, Gale had also intended to kill Paul. However, the drummer managed to flee the stage unharmed and retreat into the safety of his tour bus. Shortly after the shooting, Paul released a statement that read in part, "Dime gave it all every day to each and every one of us, and our lives have forever been hollowed without him." Paul continued to pay tribute to his brother until the very end. Paul passed away in June 2018 at 54 years old.
He recorded and made some of the most amazing. He would go to have a bad experience at Taco Bell and write a song about it.
Ultimate Classic Rock reports that the El Rosa Villa Club was demolished in 2021.
At the height of his success with the Beatles and as a solo artist, John Lennon was one of the most influential people in the world. However, no one could have expected that in December 1980, Lennon would be the target of a murder. Here are the details. After spending more than a decade with the Beatles and the first half of the 1970s as a successful solo artist, John Lennon took a step back from music after the birth of his second child, Sean. Eventually, Lennon returned to music with the album Double Fantasy, released in November 1980. Double Fantasy was a commercial success when it was released, but critics panned the album. An NME critic said that Lennon should have, quote, kept his big happy trap shut. The inspiration for the album came from a boat trip Lennon and his family took that summer of 1980. Lennon and 4-year-old Sean took a boat from Newport, Rhode Island to Bermuda. While on holiday, Lennon's songwriting inspiration returned to him for the first time in 5 years, and he wrote 30 songs. While in Bermuda, he met artist Nancy Gosnell, who drew a portrait of Lennon and his son. Lennon loved the painting. According to Gosnell, he also spoke openly about his past, his relationship with Ono and the other Beatles, and asked for the name of Gosnell's teacher in New York to assist his own artwork. Ultimate Classic Rock says that while the initial critical reception for Double Fantasy was harsh, the negative reviews disappeared following his murder, and the album went on to win the Grammy for Album of the Year. While the birth of Sean Lennon in 1975 prompted the music icon to put down his guitar and become a father, the birth of his first son, Julian Lennon, in 1963 had the opposite reaction. John Lennon was on the road during Julian's birth, and it took 3 days for the father to meet his son. This episode encapsulated the early relationship between father and son. The Irish Times reports that at one point in Julian's young life, John said this to Julian, "Sean was the product of love, you were the product of a whiskey bottle." Julian understandably grew angry at his father during his life, speaking to John only sporadically for the better part of a decade. Only at the insistence of his mother and John's first wife, Cynthia Powell, did Julian begin to open up more to his father. Paul McCartney said of his old friend, "John never really knew how to be a dad." It was McCartney, not his father, that taught young Julian how to first play guitar, and McCartney wrote the song Hey Jude to lift Julian's spirits during his parents' divorce. Julian was living in North Wales when his father was murdered across the Atlantic. In a Q&A session, Julian recalled waking up to the paparazzi outside his house. He instinctively knew what had happened, but he had to wait for his mother to return from London to officially get the news.
I felt I had to go to New York to see it for myself. I had to witness it.
Forever remembered as the man who killed John Lennon, Mark David Chapman's disturbing mental state can only in part tell the story of how and why he killed Lennon. Chapman was born on May 10, 1955 in Fort Worth, Texas. His father was a U.S. Air Force sergeant and his mother was a nurse. At the age of 16, Chapman became a born-again Christian. However, this did not improve his mental health, and in 1977, after moving to Hawaii, he attempted suicide. 2 years later, Chapman was working as a security guard and married a travel agent named Gloria Abe. Still, Chapman's mental state was an issue. Following Lennon's murder, Chapman was diagnosed with depression, suicidal tendencies, and schizophrenia. Lennon was not Chapman's first target. According to the New York Post, Chapman had considered assassinating Presidents Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. Lennon was chosen by Chapman as he felt the artist's wealth and success had made him a fraud. His justification came in part through J.D. Salinger's novel The Catcher in the Rye, and the connection he felt he had with its main character, Holden Caulfield. John Lennon's final day began at 11 a.m. when Rolling Stone magazine photographer Annie Leibovitz arrived for a photo shoot with John and Yoko. The session produced the iconic picture of a naked Lennon holding and kissing his fully clothed wife on the cheek. After the shoot, the couple participated in an interview with radio personality Dave Sholin around 12:40 p.m. Less than an hour prior, Mark David Chapman arrived outside of Lennon's home, the Dakota Apartments, and spoke with a friend of Lennon, freelance photographer Paul Gorish. Speaking to Behind the Music, Gorish remembered Chapman being a jerk and holding a copy of Double Fantasy. Around 4:30 p.m., Lennon and Ono left to work on a new single, Walking on Thin Ice, and ran into Chapman and Gorish. Lennon signed Chapman's copy of the album, and Gorish snapped a photo of the two individuals. Finishing up their song hours later, Geffen Records founder David Geffen told the couple that Double Fantasy had sold gold. The pair left the studio in high spirits around 10:30 p.m. and arrived at the Dakota a little before 11 p.m. Ono got out of the car first, and Lennon followed right behind her, noticing Chapman but not paying any mind to him. Chapman pulled out a .38 handgun and fired 5 shots, hitting Lennon 4 times in his back and chest. Officers arrived at the Dakota Apartments only minutes after the shooting. Once they arrived, the doorman quickly pointed out Mark David Chapman, who was simply standing and waiting for the officers to arrive. Chapman was then quickly arrested by officers Peter Cullen and Steve Spiro.
I turned to him and I said, you just threw your whole damn life away.
Lennon struggled up 5 steps before collapsing. He was covered in his own blood and unrecognizable to arriving officers. Officers Herb Frauenberger and Tony Palma were the first to see Lennon, and when Frauenberger turned his head to check his pulse, he noticed who it was. The officers put Lennon into the car of another arriving officer, James Moran, who took him to Roosevelt Hospital, while Frauenberger followed with Yoko in his car. At the Roosevelt, Dr. Stephen Lynn headed the emergency surgery that desperately attempted to save Lennon's life. According to Lynn, Lennon arrived with no pulse and 3 gunshot wounds in the left upper chest. Lynn also went on to say, "If Mr. Lennon was shot in the midst of a cardiac operating room with a cardiac operating room team standing by all ready to fix his wounds, I don't think they would have been able to save him." John Lennon, 40 years old, was pronounced dead at 11:07 p.m.
This evening, John Lennon arrived at the emergency room at the Roosevelt Hospital. He was dead at the time of his arrival.
In the age before social media and 24-hour news coverage, any information of John Lennon's murder would normally not have come out until the following morning. However, because of an individual who so happened to be at the right place at the right time, Lennon's murder was announced that night on a national broadcast football game to millions around the country. On December 9, 1974, 6 years and a day earlier, Lennon had been a celebrity guest on Monday Night Football and was interviewed by broadcaster Howard Cosell. On December 8, 1980, Cosell was broadcasting the game between the New England Patriots and Miami Dolphins on ABC. That night, Alan Weiss, a local WABC news producer, was involved in a motorcycle accident and was getting treatment at the Roosevelt. He overheard the officers mentioning Lennon. In a moment that has been dramatized in film, he immediately got up and told his assignment editor what he heard. After confirming the news with his doctor, the information moved up the chain of commands to the broadcast team. During a commercial break, Cosell and his co-broadcaster Frank Gifford discussed what to do. Cosell, who was friends with Lennon, questioned whether or not to say anything, but Gifford believed it was important to get the information out to the unknowing public. With 3 seconds left in the game, tied 13-13, Cosell announced to the audience that Lennon had been shot and killed.
Rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival.
Miami would win the game in overtime, but the result was far from people's minds that night or the next morning. The Beatles reached unprecedented levels of global popularity and are still seen as the greatest musical act of all time. After a publicized breakup in 1970, there were lingering questions about the band members' relationships. The 3 surviving members all had different reactions to the death of their friend and leader. Ringo Starr spoke to Barbara Walters in 1981 about John Lennon's murder. Starr saw Lennon less than a month before his death and learned about it from his stepdaughter, who told him, quote, "John's been shot." Originally believing the shot only injured him, Starr was shocked to learn that the attack killed him. Speaking to Rolling Stone magazine in 2019, Starr said upon arriving in New York, he played games with Sean Lennon at the request of Yoko Ono. Paul McCartney, despite being the closest to Lennon growing up, was initially criticized for his response. After being cornered by media for his reaction, McCartney ended the interview by saying,
"Drag, isn't it?"
McCartney's response to Lennon's death prompted many to feel that his words were callous. McCartney said that he had trouble dealing with the reality of his friend's murder and told NME that he still cries about it 4 decades later. In a 1990 interview, George Harrison recalled the last time he saw his old bandmate. He came over to Lennon's house for dinner in 1978, and the pair listened to Indian music. However, in August 1980, Harrison released an autobiography that barely mentioned Lennon, which hurt him. The pair never reconciled before Lennon's murder. John Lennon's murder ended any chances of the Fab Four getting back together for any future shows or albums. That being said, the 1970s saw plenty of opportunities for reunions, as members still worked together on each other's music. However, the most famous quasi-reunion almost occurred on Saturday Night Live. In 1976, the show's producer Lorne Michaels looked directly in the camera and made an offer of $3,000 for the Beatles to reunite on their show and perform 3 songs. Little did Michaels and the SNL cast know that less than 2 miles away, Lennon and Paul McCartney were watching the show at Lennon's Dakota apartment and talked briefly about heading down to the studio to perform as a joke. However, the pair agreed that they were tired and did not want to work on a relaxing night off. The former members of the Beatles would, throughout the 1970s, work on each other's albums, but never reunite together as a foursome. The band's initial reaction to the breakup, at least for Lennon and McCartney, was to attack each other on songs. According to Rolling Stone, McCartney's song Too Many People took shots at Lennon, who responded with the song How Do You Sleep, featuring George Harrison on guitar. It was not until the Beatles anthology in 1995 that the 3 surviving members reunited to make new music. Charged with murder in the second degree, Mark David Chapman underwent psychiatric testing where he was diagnosed as a schizophrenic by a doctor. The diagnosis, coupled with his obsession with J.D. Salinger's novel The Catcher in the Rye, his previous attempt to kill himself, and not fleeing the scene, led many to believe he would use an insanity defense. Chapman once again surprised the world by pleading guilty, saying it was what God would want from him. He was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. He has been eligible for parole since 2000, but has been denied every time, to Yoko Ono's appreciation. In a 2015 interview with People, Ono revealed that she does not really think about Chapman. Chapman and his wife Gloria had written to Ono for forgiveness, but she has always opposed his parole. And so far, Chapman has been denied parole 11 times.
In July 2009, New Jersey native Christina Grimmie posted the first video of herself singing a Hannah Montana cover on YouTube. She soon amassed a large social media following as she continued to post covers that displayed her raw talent. According to Orlando Weekly, Grimmie subsequently became Selena Gomez's opening act and appeared on Ellen. She also released music independently and made appearances at Radio Disney. In 2014, Grimmie joined Season 6 of The Voice, a televised singing competition. At just 19, she auditioned by singing Miley Cyrus's Wrecking Ball and went on to choose Adam Levine as her mentor. And although she didn't win, she came in 3rd place overall. After her time on The Voice, Grimmie continued to work on music and perform. The Orlando Weekly reports that she was even offered a contract with Island Records. On June 10, 2016, she opened for the band Before You Exit at the Plaza Live Theater in Orlando, Florida. According to E! Online, Grimmie had recently released her EP, Side A, and was on tour to promote her new music. After the concert ended, the BBC states that Grimmie stayed to meet fans and sign autographs. That's when 27-year-old Kevin Loibl approached and shot her. Loibl was quickly tackled by Grimmie's brother, though he managed to escape and turn the gun on himself. Grimmie later succumbed to her injuries and died at the local hospital at just 22 years old.
The 22-year-old murdered while meeting fans and signing autographs.
It does appear that he came here to commit this crime.
According to CNN, Kevin Loibl had become obsessed with Christina Grimmie a year before committing the murder-suicide. He believed he could have a relationship with her, going as far as losing weight and getting LASIK eye surgery and hair transplants for her, according to Billboard. Though coworkers and friends knew of his infatuation, no one knew the extent of his delusions. Loibl was said to have spent hours watching Grimmie's videos and referred to her as his soulmate. He even maintained that he had previously met her at a concert, but those close to him say he never talked about guns or threatened to hurt himself or Grimmie. Global News reports that Loibl's friend, Corey Dennington, stated that Grimmie had led Loibl to find God. According to TMZ, Loibl did have a previous history of violence, which included 2 incidents involving his father and his father's fiancée. Charges were never filed against him. CNN notes that Loibl's family said he didn't have a known mental illness. He was able to legally purchase 2 9mm handguns shortly before he murdered Grimmie. Although Dennington told Loibl that a relationship with Grimmie was impossible and irrational, Dennington said that Loibl would become angry and defensive when he brought it up. E! Online writes that Loibl traveled from St. Petersburg, Florida to Orlando with the intention to kill Grimmie. Upon the murder-suicide, TMZ stated that Loibl's family taped a statement to their door that read, "Deepest sorrow for the loss to the family, friends, and fans of the very talented, loving Christina Grimmie." Grimmie's autopsy report states that she was shot twice and died of gunshot wounds to the head and chest. No drugs were found in her system, and her death was ruled a homicide. According to the Los Angeles Times, Grimmie was shot at 10:30 p.m. and was pronounced dead after midnight. Her brother Marcus stated that when the gunman approached her, Grimmie had her arms open for him. He later told Insider she just genuinely loved the people around her and gave everyone the time of day, no matter what. Global News writes that Grimmie's The Voice coach, Adam Levine, paid for her funeral. Days before her death, Grimmie had expressed her excitement for the future in an interview with Pop Crush and stated that she was planning to release another album. Her family later started the Christina Grimmie Foundation to support families of gun violence victims. In March 2022, Grimmie's family released a new song she was working on prior to her death. The song, titled Rule the World, is being used to gather donations for Grimmie's foundation. Since its inception in 2017, the foundation has donated over $200,000. Many believe that Grimmie's tragic death wasn't headline news due to the Pulse nightclub shooting, which occurred in Orlando 2 days after her murder.
This has been such a tough week for Orlando. The venue where Grimmie was killed is just a few miles from Pulse nightclub.
When actress Rebecca Schaeffer was murdered in 1989, it set the wheels in motion for the nation's first anti-stalking laws. Privacy protections across the country were strengthened, and stalking was designated a crime for the first time in America. This is the tragic murder of 80s actress Rebecca Schaeffer, explained. Rebecca Schaeffer was born on November 6, 1967, in Oregon, to Dana and Dr. Benson Schaeffer. Schaeffer's mother worked as a writer and teacher at Portland Community College, while her father specialized in child psychology. From an early age, she showed a passion for theater and drama. Soon she was appearing in TV commercials and department store catalogs. However, according to Jewish Journal, Schaeffer hadn't always aspired to be a model and had originally dreamt of becoming a rabbi. Schaeffer moved to New York City and took up work as a waitress. She managed to book a few small roles on soap operas and movies over the course of 2 years, but nothing seemed to pan out. And then, in 1986, she landed the role of Patty on My Sister Sam, which turned out to be her breakout role. Schaeffer moved to California for the part, and although audiences loved the show, it was unfortunately canceled halfway through the second season. Born on January 2, 1970, Robert John Bardo was the seventh and youngest child of June and Philip Bardo. Bardo's father had been a non-commissioned officer in the U.S. Air Force and had met Bardo's mother while he was based in Japan. The family moved around a great deal during Bardo's childhood until finally settling in Tucson in 1983. As a child, Bardo is said to have experienced severe neglect and abuse from his mother, his father, and his older brothers. Throughout his youth, he is reported to have written letters to his teachers, apparently crying out for help amidst the dire situation with his family at home. At one point, Bardo wrote that he wanted to commit suicide and that he felt at the end of his rope. Although Bardo ended up receiving a few counseling sessions, nothing else was done. His mental health problems went unaddressed and he was eventually placed in a foster home. In 1985, Bardo was admitted into a psychiatric hospital. There, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. After 1 month, Bardo's parents removed him from the psychiatric hospital, and soon after, he dropped out of high school and got a job as a janitor at a Jack-in-the-Box. Bardo repeatedly displayed erratic behavior, and in the year and a half before Schaeffer's murder, he'd been arrested 3 times by the police for his antisocial behavior, on charges that included domestic violence. Robert John Bardo first saw Rebecca Schaeffer in a commercial for My Sister Sam, and reportedly felt an instant kinship with her. He started sending her letters and gifts. E! reports that Schaeffer initially found the fact that a fan was sending gifts her way to be endearing. Bardo recorded every episode of My Sister Sam and began to believe that he had a real and legitimate relationship with her. And when Schaeffer responded to one of Bardo's letters, he decided that was a sign that she felt the same way about him as he did about her. He then started visiting Los Angeles himself, trying to meet Schaeffer in person. But once he got to Burbank's studio looking to meet Schaeffer, teddy bear and flowers in hand, Bardo was unable to make it past security. Real Reviews reports that 1 month later, Bardo tried again, this time armed with a knife, but he was still unable to gain entrance into Burbank's studio. In response, Bardo wrote in his diary, "I don't lose, period." This wasn't the first time that Bardo had stalked someone. At one point in the 1980s, Bardo had become obsessed with Samantha Smith, a young peace activist, and had attempted to go to Maine looking for her. However, he was arrested on the way and sent home. After Smith tragically died in a plane crash in 1985, Bardo turned his sights onto Debbie Gibson, a pop star, and went to New York in pursuit of her. Bardo's infatuation with Rebecca Schaeffer became deadly after he saw her in scenes from the class struggle in Beverly Hills. Seeing her in a sex scene with another actor put him into a rage. Clinical police and forensic psychologist Dr. Chris Mahandi describes how these feelings were converted into a plan to murder, with Bardo telling himself, "I'm going to punish you and permanently possess you by taking your life." Originally, Bardo had been obsessed by Schaeffer's innocence and didn't understand the idea that she was playing a character. He said, "She came into my life in the right moment. She was brilliant, pretty, outrageous. Her innocence impressed me. She turned into a goddess for me, an idol. Since then, I turned into an atheist. I only adored her." Now he felt betrayed. In Blindsided Homicide, where it is least expected, Gregory K. Moffat writes that Bardo later told a court-appointed psychiatrist, quote, "If she was a whore, God was going to appoint me to punish her." Bardo also wrote a letter to his sister that read, "I have an obsession with the unattainable, and I have to eliminate what I cannot attain." According to the Saturday Evening Post, it was at this point that Bardo decided to find Schaeffer's home address. On March 15, 1982, actress Teresa Saldana was attacked by a stalker named Arthur Richard Jackson. He had become obsessed with Saldana after seeing her films and planned on murdering her in order to reunite with her in heaven. According to the New York Times, Jackson used a private detective to find Saldana's apartment building, where he stabbed her all over her body 10 times with a hunting knife. Saldana managed to survive because a delivery man who was driving by stopped his truck and fought Jackson off. According to E!, Robert John Bardo read an article about Jackson and Saldana and was inspired to hire a private detective in order to track down Rebecca Schaeffer.
Yeah, the Teresa Saldana case, I read about that in People magazine, and that's where I got the idea to hire the private investigator.
He'd initially tried to get her address from Schaeffer's agent on July 17, 1989, but had been refused. So for the price of $300, private investigator Anthony Zinkus got Schaeffer's address from DMV records. After Bardo got Schaeffer's address from the private eye, he went to Schaeffer's apartment on July 18, 1989. Witnesses later recalled, "We saw Bardo on Rebecca's street, showing passersby her photo and asking if they knew her and where she lived." Although people ignored him, Bardo found Schaeffer's building. Since the intercom wasn't working, Schaeffer came down to the front door when Bardo rang the bell. When Schaeffer came to the door, Bardo showed her how she'd responded so kindly to his letters and told her that he was her biggest fan. Schaeffer was polite in turn, but she told Bardo that she was busy at the moment and said, "Please take care," as she shook his hand and bid him goodbye. Bardo went to Jan's restaurant for a meal and then returned to Schaeffer's apartment 1 hour later. This time when Schaeffer came down, she said, "You came to my door again. Hurry up, I don't have much time." E also notes that she was also waiting for the script for The Godfather Part 3, since she was scheduled to audition for the role of Mary Corleone, which might explain why she was willing to repeatedly answer the door. During the trial, Bardo stated that he said, "I forgot to give you something." He then shot her twice in the chest. Rebecca Schaeffer's neighbor, Richard Goldman, heard 2 gunshots and 2 screams and came racing to the front door. However, Schaeffer died shortly after being rushed to the hospital. Goldman and other witnesses saw a man in a yellow shirt leaving the scene, but they lost sight of him after he turned into an alley. The following day, police in Tucson, Arizona were informed that there was a man walking in between cars on the highway, yelling, "I killed Rebecca Schaeffer." When asked about this incident later, Bardo said, "I thought I owed it to Rebecca to kill myself after what had happened." Tucson police arrested Bardo, and his statements were taken to be a confession to murdering Schaeffer. And Bardo offered little to no resistance to the police. According to Associated Press, Bardo appeared to be exhausted and was in an unkempt and filthy condition when he was picked up by the police. He was held on a bail of $1 million until witnesses confirmed that he was the one they saw at Schaeffer's apartment. Then, Bardo was extradited to California. Robert John Bardo's trial began in late September 1991. During the trial, it was revealed that when he first tried to purchase a gun, he was turned down due to his history of mental illness. All That's Interesting writes that Bardo was undeterred and asked his brother to purchase it for him instead. Allegedly, the brother made Bardo swear to only use the gun when the two of them were together, and he was able to be supervised. Bardo's sister also testified that on the morning of Rebecca Schaeffer's murder, Bardo had called her to let her know that he was near the actress's home. Bardo's history of mental illness was brought up by his defense attorney, Stephen Galindo, but then Deputy District Attorney Marcia Clark dismissed this, claiming that Bardo was obsessed rather than mentally ill. Galindo hoped to use Bardo's history of mental illness to prove that he was incapable of planning the murders, and thus only guilty of murder in the second degree.
He was a victim of a mental health system which was powerless to provide the type of help that he needed.
The prosecutors had agreed not to seek the death penalty, so after being found guilty of murder in the first degree, Bardo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of 2021, Bardo continues to serve his life sentence at Avenal State Prison in California. In 1990, California passed the first anti-stalking law in the United States in response to Rebecca Schaeffer's murder. According to California's anti-stalking statute by Christine B. Gregson, stalking is repeatedly following or harassing another person and making a credible threat that causes the person to fear bodily harm. Although a first stalking offense might be prosecuted as a felony, it may only be regarded as a misdemeanor if there isn't already a restraining order in place. This is likely due to the fact that Rebecca Schaeffer wasn't the only woman murdered by a stalker that year. According to E, apparently 4 other women had been murdered in Orange County alone, despite their having restraining orders filed against the men they were afraid of. Soon, the rest of the country created their own anti-stalking laws, and in 1996, Congress passed the Interstate Stalking Punishment and Prevention Act of 1996. According to the Law Library, the act was supposed to, quote, close the gaps between individual state laws and to bolster their deterrent effect. Considering that more than one actress had been assaulted, the Screen Actors Guild also centered their efforts around privacy protections and began lobbying California to strengthen their privacy laws. The Los Angeles Times reports that, originally, it only took $1 to $5 to get anyone's home address from the DMV, as long as you filled out all the paperwork. In 1988 alone, the DMV reportedly received 16 million requests of this type. In response to Schaeffer's murder, information regarding home addresses became heavily restricted, only accessible by entities such as law enforcement and insurance agencies. In 1994, Congress similarly passed the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which mandated that every state's DMV apply similar protections. This act makes it illegal for state DMVs to give out the personal information of a driver without explicit authorization from the driver. However, The Hollywood Reporter notes that these protections only go so far, and there are numerous ways that stalkers can continue to torment their victims, with cyberstalking on the internet being one such way. But in 2015, cyberstalking was also made a federal crime.
A beloved TV star was beaten to death, and evidence pointed toward a suspect. So why couldn't police solve Bob Crane's murder? Keep watching for the reasons. Before Mel Brooks and Taika Waititi were writing films ridiculing Nazis, Hogan's Heroes was one of the first and most popular programs that took the once feared Nazi regime and turned it into something to be mocked. According to Entertainment Weekly, when the show first aired in the fall of 1965, it was a departure from the contemporary sitcoms out at that time. Not only did it tackle real-life figures just 2 decades after the end of World War II and the defeat of the Third Reich, but the comedy saw its characters outwit their bumbling antagonists instead of simply reciting bad jokes to a laugh track. For the show star Bob Crane, Hogan's Heroes was the break he needed to go from a side character on well-known sitcoms to carrying one of his own. When he was first approached about the show, Crane thought the subject matter meant the series would be a drama set in a Nazi prison camp. Still, once he understood the tone, Crane took the role of Colonel Robert Hogan immediately and made the character a household name.
Colonel, I will stand for no nonsense. I want some information from you.
Gosh, you mean there's something the Gestapo doesn't know?
But like so many other sitcom actors, the program that made him a superstar was the apex of Crane's career, and it was followed by a steady decline. For Crane, this career downturn was worsened by his own personal demons, all of which culminated in his tragic murder in 1978. Whether money and fame changed Bob Crane's personality, or the actor was always obsessed with sex, money and fame were simply gas on a fire. Investigators believe that the actor's sex addiction played an important role in his eventual murder. On the set of Hogan's Heroes, other actors had only positive words for the show star, but during the show's original run, despite being married to his high school sweetheart and parenting 3 children with his wife, Crane began an affair with 2 different actresses. One of the women, Patty Olson, better known by her stage name Sigrid Valdis, eventually became his second wife. However, even a new wife did not stop Crane from having numerous affairs. According to Reader's Digest, Crane had hundreds of sexual partners during his marriages, but even those adventures weren't enough for the TV star. With the help of a video equipment salesperson named John Henry Carpenter, Crane began recording his sexual escapades. The actor also took numerous photos of these affairs and compiled them into books. On the set of his 1973 film Superdad, Crane even showed some of the photographs he took to people while filming. Soon, his private life became the subject of tabloids, such as the National Enquirer. Robert Crane, son of Bob Crane and his first wife, later defended his father's sex life, telling Entertainment Weekly that all the women he videotaped or had pictures of were consenting adults. Sadly, though, Crane's sexual adventures still ended in tragedy. On June 29, 1978, Bob Crane was found murdered in his apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona. According to Crane's son Robert, his father told him in their final conversation together that he wanted to divorce his second wife and get people like Carpenter out of his life. During the investigation into Crane's murder, all the evidence pointed toward Carpenter. His rental car was stained with blood that was the same type as Crane's. However, the lack of a murder weapon hindered the investigation. It was not until 1992 that John Henry Carpenter was tried for Bob Crane's murder, after previously unseen crime scene photos revealed brain tissue was found in the rental car. Still, DNA testing came back inconclusive, and a witness said that Carpenter and Crane were on friendly terms the night before the murder. Carpenter was acquitted in 1994 and died 4 years later, leaving the murder unsolved. Speaking to Entertainment Weekly, Scottsdale detective Barry Vassal suggested that the outcome could have been different had investigators gotten the, quote, slam dunk of an accurate DNA test. Sadly, the age of the case and the inconclusive test results meant no conviction came, and Bob Crane's murder remains officially unsolved decades later. If you or anyone you know is struggling with addiction issues, help is available. Visit the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website, or contact SAMHSA's National Helpline at 1-800-662-HELP-4357.
Why would a famous singer's killer be kept from other inmates? And what's she doing for work behind bars? Here's where Selena's killer is now. Selena Quintanilla Perez ran into a motel lobby before collapsing. It was March 31, 1995, and she'd just been shot in the back. The famous singer managed to name her killer before her tragic death at 23. As she lay bleeding from the .38 caliber slug, she told the sales director of the Corpus Christi Days Inn, Yolanda Saldivar, in room 158. Selena died at the hospital a short time later. Selena's family believes Saldivar, the head of her fan club and manager of the singer's boutiques, had bilked her out of at least $30,000, according to ABC7. When Selena went to retrieve some financial documents from Saldivar, the then 34-year-old shot the singer. Saldivar was arrested after a police standoff that lasted more than 9 hours, and she later maintained that the shooting was an accident.
I did not kill Selena. It was an accident.
On October 26, 1995, a judge sentenced Saldivar to life in prison after a jury found her guilty of murder. She's currently serving her sentence at Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, and is up for parole in March 2025. Yolanda Saldivar spends most of her time in a small cell at the maximum security women's prison due to continued death threats from other inmates, according to the Messenger. Abraham Quintanilla, Selena's father, told Univision that he and his family still get letters from prisoners at Mountain View willing to avenge the singer's death. Referring to Saldivar's time in protective custody, he told the broadcaster in 2018, "I think she is in a safer place now, but he believes she would be in danger if she was ever released into the general population." Saldivar allegedly has a bounty on her head, and on at least one occasion has come close to being physically attacked during her time in prison. In 2016, prison guards had to restrain 2 other inmates who lunged at her, according to the Messenger. A former inmate told the outlet in August 2023, "She is despised. Everyone wants to get her. She's the most hated person at Mountain View." Still, Saldivar has had at least one friend at the prison. Diane Zamora, another high-profile inmate. The former Naval Academy midshipman killed her teenage rival in a love triangle in 1995. She grew close to Saldivar while they were both in the protective custody unit, according to the Associated Press. The sprawling prison facility where Saldivar lives encompasses nearly 100 acres, with a working farm and land for cattle grazing. The property houses other infamous inmates, including the former Dallas police officer and convicted killer Amber Geiger, who shot and killed her neighbor Botham Jean in 2018.
I hate myself every single day.
When Saldivar is not in her 6 feet by 10 feet cell, she is busy working. According to the tabloid Radar Online, a Texas prison press officer said Saldivar's job was to pass out food trays from a cart to other prisoners in her section of the prison. She has also spent her time attempting to get a new trial. Carlos Valdez, the prosecutor who helped convict Saldivar, wrote in his 2005 book Justice for Selena, State vs. Yolanda Saldivar, that although Saldivar is required by law to serve a minimum of 30 years in prison, she keeps trying to find a path to an earlier release. The latest attempt was in 2019. The Corpus Christi Caller-Times reported Saldivar petitioned for a new trial after alleging Valdez had withheld evidence in the case beneficial to the defendant. Her attorney said in court documents that Valdez kept blood-stained white tennis shoes and a black cap out of the trial, and that he later showed off these items to the media. Saldivar also argued that bullets and casings were never found at the crime scene, and that no fingerprints were lifted from the weapon used in the crime. A judge dismissed the petition because it was filed with the wrong court, and as of this video, it apparently has yet to be refiled in the proper venue.
Prior to November 1st, 2006, Adrienne Shelly was known as a star of independent movies. But after that day, everyone came to know her as the actor, writer, and director who was horrifically murdered in Manhattan. So what exactly went down at the scene of the crime? Mother to a young daughter and wife to a loving husband, actor and screenwriter Adrienne Shelly was on the cusp of fame when she was found dead in the Greenwich Village apartment she used as an office. When Shelly's husband, Andy Ostroy, hadn't heard from her all day after dropping her off that morning, he finally went to her apartment office at about 6 p.m. to check on her. That's when he made a devastating discovery. Shelly was hanging from a bedsheet tied to the shower rod in the bathroom. She had been dead for several hours. Initially, investigators assumed that the death was a suicide. Shelly's friends and family, particularly her husband, disputed this on the basis that they simply couldn't believe that she would take her own life and leave her young daughter behind.
She was making plans with our friends for the weekend, dropping off things to our daughter's school. That little girl has to grow up knowing the truth.
Upon further investigation, two major clues were found: a dusty men's size 8 footprint in the toilet in the bathroom, and the fact that the knot used to hang Shelly was tied in an unusually intricate way. She also had obvious marks above her cheeks and her right eye. Police matched the footprint to several more found downstairs on a construction site and discovered that the lead of the project was a man named Wilson Pilko. Upon visiting Wilson Pilko at his home, police spotted men's Reebok sneakers that appeared to be a similar size to the footprint discovered in the bathroom. The shoes turned out to belong to Wilson's brother, Diego Pilko, who had illegally immigrated from Ecuador and had also been working on the construction project. At first, Diego was hesitant to talk, but he eventually confessed. He told police that Adrienne Shelly had confronted him regarding noise from the construction and that she had threatened to call 911. Fearing deportation, Diego followed Shelly to her apartment, where he pushed her and she knocked her head. He then staged a suicide to shift the blame. However, this version of the story that Diego originally told the police turned out to be false. He later revealed the truth. Shelly caught him sneaking into the apartment and taking money from her purse before saying that she would call the police. Terrified of being forced to return to Ecuador, he attacked Shelly inside the apartment. During Diego's initial bail hearing after the arrest, Assistant District Attorney Marit Delosier stated, "He said he fought with the victim, tied a sheet around her neck, and dragged her to the bathroom and hung her from the shower rod." After Pilko's confession, everything fell into place. The detail of the intricate knot was even explained by his experience with tying pigs in Ecuador. It was later revealed that neck compression was Adrienne Shelly's official cause of death, which could have been from either the strangling or the staged hanging. Astonishingly, Diego Pilko pleaded not guilty before being convicted of second-degree murder. He received 25 years in prison without parole. Adrienne Shelly's story didn't stop there, though. In a bittersweet twist of fate, her film Waitress was accepted into the Sundance Film Festival after her death. In 2006, her husband, Andy Ostroy, created the Adrienne Shelly Foundation, which offers women filmmakers much-needed financial support. The nonprofit's website describes its namesake on its homepage by saying, "Adrienne Shelly was a one-of-a-kind person. Funny, silly, smart, cool, and a naturally gifted actor, writer, and director. A kind, generous, beautiful soul whose infectious smile illuminated everything around her. In 2021, Ostroy made Adrienne, a documentary paying tribute to his late wife by chronicling the highs and lows of her life and career. One of the most painful moments to watch involves her declaring her hope that Waitress would make things easier for anyone else experiencing motherhood for the first time.
The actual fear of how your life is going to change, it's not spoken about.
Waitress ended up being a success that inspired a hit Broadway musical. But sadly, Shelly was never able to see it for herself.
BBC journalist Jill Dando was the star of 90s unsolved murder series Crime Watch. She could never have known that she would one day become its subject.
This program was her passion. And now, as Jill helps others, we hope we can do the same for her.
Jill Dando was born in Somerset in 1961 and began her journalism career at a local newspaper. By the 1990s, she was a household name in the UK. At around 11:30 a.m. on April 26, 1999, Dando was killed with a single pistol shot to her head. The killer came up behind her as she was about to enter her London home, grabbed her by the arm, and shoved her to the ground before firing. More than 20 years on, Dando's murder remains unsolved, even after police conducted thousands of interviews and culled through thousands of potential suspects. An unnamed former police detective told Vice in 2019, "Other than terror-related inquiries, I know of no other investigation with anything like the volume." In May 2000, the police arrested Barry George, a local man with developmental disabilities, based on scant evidence. George had earlier convictions for attempted rape and indecent assault. Police, after finding multiple copies of a magazine featuring Jill Dando in George's apartment, believed he was obsessed with her. A key piece of evidence was a microscopic particle found in George's coat pocket believed to be gunshot residue. A jury convicted George the next year, and the court sentenced him to life in prison. After several attempts, George's conviction was overturned in 2007. The particle evidence was thrown out, and he went free the next year after a retrial led to his acquittal. With George's release from prison, the police were back to square one with who was behind the murder of the Golden Girl of British TV. Many theories continue to circulate as to who was behind the killing. Two theories involve European hitmen. At the time of Dando's killing, NATO was in the midst of a bombing campaign against Serbian forces responsible for ethnic cleansing in the Balkans. Just days before her death, the US and the UK had bombed the Radio Television Serbia building in Belgrade, killing 16 employees. The family of then Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic owned the station. Dando had recently made an on-air appeal for aid for Kosovo Albanian refugees, which raised a massive amount of money. Some believe Milosevic sought revenge by sending a hitman to kill her, since she was the face of the BBC. A more recent theory involved the former head of elite model management Gerald Marie. Lisa Brinkworth, another BBC journalist, had gone undercover in 1998 to expose Marie's alleged sex crimes. In 2022, Brinkworth filed court documents alleging Marie hired a Russian hitman to kill her, who mistakenly murdered Dando instead. Marie's legal team strenuously denied the allegations. There was still another theory involving a hitman, this one from inside England. In 2015, Mark Williams Thomas, a television journalist and retired police detective, floated the idea that Dando's murder could have been a hit put out by someone in the London underworld in retribution for her work on Crime Watch. 4 years later, Williams Thomas interviewed an unnamed hitman who told the journalist he believed he knew who the killer was, but refused to say for fear of retribution. During a 2019 appearance on This Morning, Williams Thomas said, "There are some very nasty, horrible people out there, criminals, and the crucial element from their point of view is that they may perceive that Crime Watch puts criminals away, therefore putting their friends and colleagues away, and I think that was the reason."
The motivation, the reason behind it, I think it has something to do with her work on Crime Watch.
The police looked into this angle, but after investigating 30 potential suspects and interviewing known underworld hitmen in prison, they found no conclusive evidence to support the theory. Perhaps the most disputed theory is that someone killed Dando to keep her from revealing what she'd uncovered about an alleged pedophile ring involving the BBC. But according to journalist Nick Ross, who had worked with Dando, it's just another conspiracy theory.
We've had the whole of the London underworld turn over, the Liverpool underworld. We've had theories it was a paedophile. I mean, this is just saloon bar gossip.
Jill Dando's brother, Nigel Dando, believes his sister's murder was a random act of brutality. He told The Times, "My personal feeling is it was someone looking for a kick and for notoriety. Jill was in the wrong place at the wrong time." To this day, Dando's murder is officially listed as unsolved. In 2019, Detective Chief Inspector Hamish Campbell sat down with the BBC to discuss the investigation and reiterated that police had thoroughly examined all the cases that Dando was involved in.
We, the Metropolitan Police writ large, investigated that case so thoroughly
to the end of our ability.
A string of grisly murders, a mysterious motive, and a killer with an unbelievable backstory. There's a reason Gianni Versace's assassination continues to captivate the world. Versace might be a globally recognized name today, but that wasn't always the case. Gianni Versace first started the brand in 1978, and by 1997, his fashion empire was worth an impressive $807 million per biography. However, the very same year, Versace was targeted in an early morning and extremely public assassination. On July 15, 1997, Versace left his home in Miami Beach, went for a walk, greeted his neighbors, picked up 5 magazines, and strolled back. He was just walking through his front gates when someone approached him from behind and shot him twice at point-blank range, then walked away. Tragically, Versace was pronounced dead at a nearby trauma center. It wasn't long before the killer was identified as 27-year-old Andrew Cunanan. Before killing Versace, Cunanan had already left a bloody trail across the U.S., which had garnered him the attention of the FBI. His story would come to an end in Miami, too. When cornered on a houseboat, he died by suicide. He would leave behind no explanation as to why he targeted and killed one of the world's most famous fashion designers. But as more of the story unfolded, the full tragedy became public. A few months after Gianni Versace's death, Vanity Fair did a deep dive into the life of his killer, Andrew Cunanan. Reporters found a well-read, highly intelligent man who relied heavily on older men to fund his desire for a wildly extravagant lifestyle. He was also described as a chronic liar who was obsessed with status. Acquaintances claimed they had known that Cunanan was a deeply troubled person. An old friend of Cunanan's recalled an argument with the killer, telling Vanity Fair, "He grabbed me around the neck so hard he was choking me by his grip. Something had snapped in him. Now I realize the guy was hunting. He was getting the thrill of the hunt, the thrill of the kill. I saw it in his eyes. I saw it in his body. He had stepped over the edge." Vanity Fair also reported that Cunanan regularly shared stories that made him seem larger than life, such as name-dropping Versace and boasting about connections to famous and wealthy individuals.
And I think even he believed it at times.
In today's world, most famous people are surrounded by security guards, but back in 1997, that wasn't the case for everyone, including Gianni Versace. According to the Associated Press, Versace's murder prompted scores of celebrities to reach out to private security companies as they rethought the level of protection they were surrounded by. The fashion designer was alone when he was murdered, which apparently wasn't unusual. Speaking to the Associated Press, a Versace spokesperson revealed, Versace disliked security. He didn't like having someone standing over him. He thought security isolated him from people. Those closest to the designer reportedly wanted him to rethink his stance on hiring security and employing bodyguards, but he refused. As Versace's longtime partner, Antonio D'Amico, told People, "We never felt in danger. He didn't want to draw more attention to himself than necessary with all the bodyguards." By the time Andrew Cunanan shot Gianni Versace, he had already been connected to 4 different murders. Cunanan was linked to the deaths of Jeffrey Trail and David Madsen in Minnesota, Chicago real estate developer Lee Miglin, and cemetery caretaker William Reese in New Jersey, per Time. Of the victims, Madsen had the strongest connection to Cunanan as his former boyfriend. Although the motive for killing Trail has never been established, Cunanan reportedly considered him to be his best friend, according to Vanity Fair. While Miglin was targeted for unknown reasons, Reese was likely killed for his vehicle. Jeffrey Trail was murdered in April 1997 and was Cunanan's first kill. Trail's body was discovered in David Madsen's apartment, per CBS, while Madsen's remains were later recovered from the nearby East Rush Lake. Along with Trail's body, officers also recovered a duffel bag with Cunanan's name on it. Madsen and Trail's deaths were immediately connected, and law enforcement knew that Cunanan was driving Madsen's red Jeep. Authorities almost arrested Andrew Cunanan on a number of occasions prior to him killing Gianni Versace. The first happened in Illinois when Cunanan traded Madsen's Jeep for the green Lexus belonging to his next victim, Lee Miglin. According to the Los Angeles Times, Cunanan had been on the run for days before he realized he was being tracked by law enforcement. It's suspected that he heard a report on the news placing him in the Philadelphia area, which is when he ditched the vehicle for a truck stolen from his next victim, William Reese. He subsequently traveled to Miami, where he was recognized at a sandwich shop. Employees called the police, who arrived after he'd left. Cunanan was also a regular at a pizza place in the area, and employees noticed he'd cut his hair. However, the most shocking miss occurred when Cunanan pawned a coin at a Miami Beach pawn shop, per the New York Times. The shop owners followed procedure by checking his identification and submitting reports to law enforcement, which contained Cunanan's real name and the hotel where he was staying. The forms were submitted to the local police department 5 days before Versace's murder, where they promptly disappeared into a backlog of paperwork.
I thought to myself, this is going to end really badly.
At the time of his death, Gianni Versace had been living with his longtime partner, Antonio D'Amico. Versace had initially hired D'Amico in 1982 to help make some of his designs a reality, according to The Telegraph. 10 years later, the couple moved to the Miami home that would become renowned for its lavish parties. When Versace was murdered at this home in 1997, D'Amico was inside and heard the gunshots. Upon the release of American Crime Story: The Assassination of Gianni Versace, which recreated the devastating murder, D'Amico told The Guardian, "I felt as if my blood had turned to ice. I saw Gianni lying on the steps with blood around him. At that point, everything went dark. I was pulled away. I didn't see any more." Following Versace's death, D'Amico spiraled into a deep depression, as he explained to The Guardian. "I was in a nightmare. I felt nothing and gave no importance to anything because it felt false to have expectations of life." Versace was a family-owned operation from the beginning, per Insider. As Gianni built his business, his sister Donatella and brother Santo worked alongside him. Eventually, the family grew to include their children. When Gianni was killed, the bulk of Versace's money passed to Donatella, Santo, and Donatella's daughter Allegra. Donatella stepped in to run and grow the business in her brother's absence. In 2017, she discussed her own struggle in coming to terms with Gianni's death, telling The Guardian, "My brother was the king and my whole world had crashed around me. For the first 5 years, I was lost. I made a lot of mistakes. I had been listening to everyone else, and then I realized who was the person my brother listened to? Me." The investigation into Gianni Versace's murder ended in December 1997. However, the investigation failed to explain why Andrew Cunanan killed the fashion designer. As the Miami Beach police chief told the Los Angeles Times, "What we cannot establish is motive. It might have been a robbery. It could have been Andrew Cunanan seeking the exposure of gunning down a person of this stature. It could have been revenge. We would all like to know, especially in a high-profile case like this." Investigators reportedly weren't even able to figure out whether Cunanan and Versace had ever met. While there were rumors that they knew each other, nothing could be confirmed. While decades have passed since Versace's death, no motive has ever been uncovered. Any theories regarding Cunanan's alleged motives are sadly just theories. When TV producer Ryan Murphy announced the premiere of American Crime Story: The Assassination of Gianni Versace, not everyone was thrilled. In fact, most of the key players in real life came forward to condemn this depiction of Gianni's murder, including the Versace family. In an official statement to Vanity Fair, the family said, "Since Versace did not authorize the book on which this is partially based, nor has it taken part in the writing of the screenplay, this TV series should only be considered as a work of fiction." Murphy issued a counter-statement saying that, contrary to the Versace family's insistence the TV show was fiction, he stood by the truthfulness of the script and the book on which it was based, per Entertainment Weekly. Doubling down on the family's disdain, Versace's longtime partner Antonio D'Amico reiterated that American Crime Story took many liberties with the truth. Speaking to People, D'Amico explained, "I feel, together with those who knew me well, that my character is a misrepresentation of myself and what our relationship was like." At the crime scene, there was one small detail that kicked off a slew of rumors. A dead bird was found alongside Versace's body, a tiny object with a potentially huge meaning. Speaking to 48 Hours, a Miami Beach police officer revealed that a dead bird often indicated a hit carried out in connection with the mafia. It was quickly discovered that the bird had just been an unfortunate casualty caused by a splintering bullet, but it was made into something much more. According to Town & Country, it was later discovered that Andrew Cunanan's father had been keeping the rumor alive by continuing to point the finger at the mob instead of his son. Decades later, the rumor still hasn't died. In 2010, a book even claimed that Versace's murder had been ordered by and carried out on behalf of the Calabrian Mafia. As for why, it was alleged that Versace had been in a network of people who were laundering money for the mob. Reporting on the claim, The Telegraph revealed that the Versace family denounced the allegations and promised they would take every step necessary to protect the late Gianni Versace's legacy. Andrew Cunanan died by suicide on a Miami houseboat the day after Gianni Versace's funeral. According to the New York Times, he had been trying to get a fake passport that would allow him to get out of the country, but that didn't happen. Although Cunanan's suicide brought an end to a manhunt that had been going on for months and spanned the entire United States, it also left behind questions that would never be answered. As the Washington Post quickly pointed out, it also meant that Cunanan would never be put on trial for the killings and would only ever be known, technically, as an alleged serial killer. Unfortunately, bringing the investigation to an end isn't quite the same as closure. As a friend of Cunanan's victim Jeffrey Trail told 48 Hours, "I didn't want him to do anything but go to jail and rot." By the time Ryan Murphy went to film American Crime Story at Gianni Versace's mansion, much of the furniture had been sold, but the building itself was still strikingly similar to the designer's original vision per Vogue. As the site of one of the most shocking murders in recent history, Versace's mansion continues to generate interest with the general public. Plus, the house's grisly history didn't end with Versace's assassination. After Versace's death, the house was reportedly purchased and converted into a members-only club that soon went bankrupt. From there, it was auctioned off and converted again, this time into a hotel. The day before the 24th anniversary of Versace's death, the property hit the headlines once more. According to NBC Miami, 2 men were discovered in one of the hotel's suites, and an investigation ruled that they had died in a double suicide. While there was no immediate statement made on any connection between the 2021 deaths and the murder of Gianni Versace, the coincidence was not overlooked. If you or anyone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988 or by calling 1-800-273-TALK 8255.